You're listening to the Place Northwest podcast, your digital resource for the latest insight and analysis on all things property in the northwest of England.
Greetings and salutations, and welcome to the Place Northwest podcast. I'm Julia Hatmaker, Deputy Editor at Place Northwest. Today, we're talking about regeneration, and more specifically, the role heritage properties can play in it. Heritage and regeneration have a bit of a bad reputation at the moment, considering Liverpool lost its UNESCO World Heritage status over a regeneration plan earlier this year. But is heritage actually the enemy of regeneration? Or could it be, perhaps, an ally? To answer that question, we're going to Rochdale, a borough that prioritizes redeveloping its historic buildings. Joining me today are two individuals who have been heavily involved with the projects there: conservation architect and Donald Insall Associates Director Simon Malam, and Rochdale Development Agency Heritage Director Emma Birkett. Emma, Simon, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, so let's just go ahead and get straight to the point. The big question here: is heritage the enemy of regeneration? Simon, start us out.
Well, thanks, Julia. I'd say not. The main thing is that heritage provides a sense of place and identity. It's something that's grown and developed incrementally. It can't be recreated overnight. And we only have to look at the great places in the UK that have heritage at their core as evidence of this. So if we look at the cities and regions around Manchester, the regional towns, Oldham, Rochdale, they're very distinctive, and it's the grain and the heritage which makes these places unique and gives them each their own unique selling points. This sense of place and identity, we can't recreate it in a short space of time with wholly new development. It doesn't give the depth that you expect with heritage places. I've worked abroad as a conservation architect and seen attempts at creating identity from nothing. And it always comes with mixed success. Large-scale developments in the Middle East, for example. We're incredibly lucky in the UK to have such a rich heritage, and we should build on that, and regeneration should embrace it. I think it's also important to say that heritage is not just about buildings and the physical environment. It's about the people as well. It's the people who shaped and used the buildings and continue to use them. The buildings and the physical environment are tangible evidence of the communities which created them. And regeneration should be seen as the next step in that journey. It's a continuum. It's dynamic and it's not static, and it shouldn't be seen as the enemy of regeneration. In summary, each place has a unique and distinctive history. And we must embrace that for the benefit of the people who live, work, and visit. And this brings with it a richer outcome for the community and overall a better result. And we just get a much more positive end result from embracing heritage as part of the regeneration process.
Well, I absolutely agree with Simon, and I think one of the things that's come over really strongly in Rochdale is the sense of local pride, ownership, and love of the historic buildings in the town, and particularly the town centre. Our project is funded by external partners as well as the local authority. So in this case, the lottery fund, and we had to consult very widely in order to support the investment in the town hall. And we consulted with a huge range of communities from very diverse interest groups, from veterans through to Asian dance communities. And what was unbelievably impressive is that every single one of these groups had a sense of ownership of the town hall. And this is despite the town hall being inaccessible to virtually all members of the public for very many years. The love of the building was incredible. And the community pride that represents really gives us our mandate to restore and regenerate the area. I think the other thing I'd like to say, and this is emerging body of research and evidence, National Trust is working on it, but also some universities, is that there's increasing evidence that people love being in buildings that have a rich patina of history and have stories to tell, both in their fabric and also in their interpretation, and that mental health and well-being benefits from being in places of this kind of substance and history and beauty is really beneficial. And I think I've been walking around, I've been working in Rochdale Town Hall now since 2018, and you definitely feel that. And those kind of things can't be recreated, as Simon says.
Yeah, I think that's definitely something we've been seeing about redevelopment and regeneration projects across the Northwest. Almost every developer you speak with will say the key part of one of these schemes is making sure there's a sense of local identity, and they can't all be the same. And it sounds like heritage is a really great way of just addressing that and incorporating that into the regeneration scheme from the get-go. So we know that it can help create civic pride and a sense of identity for a place. What else can heritage do for regeneration efforts? Simon, you want to give us some thoughts on that?
Well, I think it's a snowball effect. I think, you launch one project and others then take off. And if we go back all the way to 1968, really, when there was a pilot study done in Chester, of all places, on how heritage could be used as a catalyst for regeneration. Chester was down at heel back then in certain areas. There was an area cut off by the ring road, and there were a lot of dilapidated buildings. And up until that point, the default post-war had been to knock down and rebuild. But Donald Insall was commissioned to produce a pioneering report on how this could change. And this went on to show that heritage-led regeneration can work. And it was the first time, recommendation from the report, that a conservation officer was ever appointed. That was the first time the concept of a conservation officer came about. And back then, the conservation officer was seen as a facilitator. So, they were there to help engage the community, help to whip up enthusiasm, combine several different owners together so that things could actually happen to a multi-occupancy building. And the work that then carried on during the 70s and early 80s demonstrated that heritage-led regeneration is a real thing. Unfortunately, people have a blind spot to a building which looks old and tired, and it's about opening people's eyes and helping them to realize the potential. And it's not just about the buildings themselves, it's about the streetscape, and it's about incorporating new schemes into the historic fabric. So things change. It's about incorporating the old with the new. It's not just about preserving what we've got. And this pattern has been repeated now in towns and cities throughout the UK, starting with Chester, and the recent comparable is in Rochdale, where amazingly, the council took the first steps in the revealing of the River Roch project, where the old river, which had been culverted a long time ago, was opened up in a big investment, a big public realm scheme. The council saw the potential, and it gave people confidence in the town centre, and that's been used as a springboard to the great regeneration that we now see going on, which is centred on many of the heritage projects in Rochdale.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Simon is correct. And confidence, I think, is the key, both for the councils, the landowners, the private sector, and external partners that considering funding heritage-led regeneration. It is about gathering those partners and giving them confidence that the whole will become greater than the sum of the parts. I think it's interesting, Simon says that you mentions Chester. Well, Chester is a renowned heritage city now. If you walk around Rochdale isn't associated with heritage at the moment, but actually it's got a wealth of historic buildings and street patterns, some of which are second to none. I mean, Rochdale Town Hall, some people consider one of the finest buildings in the country, but do people know that's in Rochdale? I very much doubt it. But it is, and I think the work that we're doing here hopefully will raise awareness of the heritage wealth that towns like Oldham, Bury, Rochdale, Bolton, they have wonderful historic cores that haven't luckily been destroyed. The interesting thing with Rochdale, I guess, is that the River Roach was an expensive project to reveal a river. It had no other benefit. It didn't release retail space or change access to the town centre. It was merely an environmental improvement of some significance. But what it kick-started was a belief that the history in Rochdale was fantastic and could lead to a better quality of life and a better environment. I think where we've seen it most is that external funders have realised it's worth doing, and it's worth doing in Rochdale. So on the back of the river Roach, we certainly managed through thick and thin to hold on to the private sector, big retail and leisure development, which sits alongside the new tram and bus stations and looks towards the modern area of the town centre. But equally, it's given us the ability to draw in funds through the Heritage Action Zone on Drake Street. We have a new fire station museum for Greater Manchester that's just opened. We have a church that's going through a lottery, heritage lottery funding. And of course, we've got the town hall, which is on site now. So I think that confidence from that initial work is really having a substantial impact now that you can see sort of evidenced around the town centre. I think that the way this confidence can work is through giving sort of a secondary opportunities. Yes, for instance, where we've also got a huge public realm project, which is closing roads, getting rid of car parking, stuff that's controversial and difficult. But actually what we're creating is, of course, a setting fit for a Grade 1 listed building, but a space, an external space comparable to the great Northern European towns, where events and festivals and civic, real sort of sign of civic pride and confidence. So the public realm is very, very important. But what rings that then are secondary retail and F&B and creative sector opportunities, which are already starting. We're starting to inquiries about that. And I think that's really the message, that a mixed town centre where you have an ability to accommodate new build. We don't keep everything. We're not precious about everything, but the buildings and the structures that have merit are kept. And around that, we can offer improved environmental attractions and a good place to invest.
Okay, so we've got, they help build civic pride and sense of identity. And then 2, they help unlock other sites for regeneration. These are 2 great reasons why people should be considering heritage-led regeneration. Can I get a third, please?
Well, I think there's a general fear about dealing with listed buildings. And I don't pretend it's easy. There's definitely a perceived inflexibility in the way the buildings can be changed and adapted. But for us, it's about understanding the building and doing your research, understanding the intentions of the original architect. That's important, and identifying the significance. And through that process, we then identify the opportunities for change. So at Rochdale Town Hall, for instance, we've got fantastic, highly significant spaces. I mean, the Great Hall is a wonder to behold, and we've got the Mayor's suite of rooms. And it's accepted. They need to stay as they are. They've got wonderful decorative paint schemes, paneling, very, very rich interiors. But there's other areas of the town hall which have been changed over the years, where there's opportunities to bring back new uses, create something new, and add that layer of history to the building. Do something for the people of Rochdale in the 21st century within the building. And then that additional layer of history becomes part of the story. As conservation architects, what we try and do is manage the change. People perhaps don't immediately think of the conservation architect as a creative person, but they have to be to manage that change. Heritage regeneration must be about change. It's not just about keeping everything the same and living in the past. So by doing a thorough analysis of what we've got, understanding it properly, historic buildings can be made to adapt. The important thing is to work with the building. Don't fight it, and make sure that the new use is compatible. The great thing about the Rochdale Town Hall scheme is that the building will continue in its role as a public building, and that's what it was designed for, and it will continue to be a building for the people. And that's a great story in itself.
All right, so those are 3 great reasons. And I feel like one we have not mentioned, but I'm sure you guys were about to say, was sustainability. I mean, we've done a lot of podcasts where we've talked about retrofitting and how important that is. Emma, do you mind kind of sharing your thoughts on how they can be sustainable?
Yeah, sure, Julia. I mean, it's not easy. One doesn't want to sort of imply that everything's a sort of walk in the park. But fundamentally, I would regard it that repurposing has got to be more sustainable than knocking down and building again. I mean, that has got to be the benchmark of sustainability, and therefore that's sort of almost case made. But we can do more than just repurpose. We can make these buildings far more sustainable in terms of their environmental and carbon footprint. And it takes imaginative team to do it, and it's expensive. And we're not going to hold out that Rochdale Town Hall is ever going to become BREEAM excellent, but the cost savings we can make by, for instance, putting in a huge amount of insulation in the roofs, looking at where we can we can double glaze in areas that are of less sensitive significance. Also LED lighting, of course. We are taking away all our beautiful historic lights, and we're having them restored so that LED lights work in them. So again, that's possible with a bit of care and finding the right company. This kind of work can be done. We're looking currently at air source heat pumps for the building. Again, a tricky piece of work, doable, but with a lot of thinking through. And again, that will mean that the carbon footprint of the building is significantly lowered, and gains can be made. The other thing to sort of say is that if we don't repurpose, we will never be able to build buildings of this quality again. It simply wouldn't be possible to have the kind of specification that we have at Rochdale. It just is non-existent nowadays. So that's really important. And within that, there's a longevity to these buildings that new build, again, just don't have. And we feel that that's the case to mean that they are worth reinvesting in, and that we can improve their sustainability. The other point to say about the more general definition of sustainability is that if we are making these buildings attractive and accessible, people will use them, and that gives them a sustainability as well.
I think also to add, Emma, and totally agree with all that, the great thing about where we're at with Rochdale at the moment is the fact that the technology is leaping forward at a pace. And 2 or 3 years ago, what we're proposing to do now with renewables, possibly wasn't an option. At Rochdale, we're aiming to install a hybrid system which uses air source heat pump in the autumn and the spring, but where there's a real demand for heat in the middle of winter, it's supplemented with gas-fired boilers. So that hybrid technology and the recent advances in air source heat pump technology means that door is opened for us, and we have actually we're well on our way now to really improving the carbon footprint of the building.
Now, I feel like we've done a good job of really building up the case for why you should do a heritage-led regeneration effort, but let's bring it back down to earth a little bit. It is a great thing to do for all the reasons mentioned above, but there are definitely some challenges that come with these kind of projects. So Emma, can you just share a couple of the ones that you've noticed, the key challenges and issues facing these kinds of projects?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, it is. It's a sort of. It's not. I wouldn't describe it quite as a battle, but you have to work very hard, and you have to push things forward at every stage with projects like this. And one of the ones that I think we battle with all the time is that these projects are perceived by everyone, the funders, the contractors, the teams, as high risk. And yes, they probably are in some ways, but with the right team, I think almost all of the risks can be mitigated. But what it does mean is that for instance, in Rochdale, the local authorities had to be really brave, and not all local authorities are in that position. This project takes a huge amount of vision, and once you're in it, you're in it. Sometimes the cost commitments are not clear at the early stages, but it requires that drive and commitment, and that's often quite a challenge. But I think that what we've done in Rochdale is we've been pretty careful, and we spent a lot of time making sure that the key stakeholders properly understand the risks that are involved with a project like this. And the other thing I think is really important is that owners that are particularly risk averse and want to transfer all the risks, say, onto the main contractor, don't help with the market thinking that these projects, they don't want to touch them with a barge pole. But we've been really careful, and we've clearly articulated how we're going to share the risk with the market, and we've been very clear and reasonable. And I think that's helped. It means we've got a great contractor on site, and things are progressing well. I think the other thing to do is make sure your costs of mitigation are quantified at an early stage. And this, really means you need to have the right kind of contingencies sitting in the right parts of your budget. And yes, we've had to do that. And often people question, well, why have you got such high levels of contingency? But our experience says that, if you do that, then you can have some control over your project in terms of time and cost. I think then, Simon and I have both done enough of these to know that fundamentally these projects are expensive, and not only are they expensive, but they take an awful lot of time. My rule of thumb is it's 10 years, regardless of how hard you push, it's always going to be 10 years. And that just seems to be the way it falls. So I think you have to acknowledge that particularly projects of the status as the town hall, they come at a premium, and we have to price that from the beginning. There's always sitting there, and I think probably Simon will talk about this a bit later on, a conservation deficit, which is intransigent, really, and there's no getting away from it, and it just has to be covered, and it's usually covered from the public sector. It's not something the private sector is able to share. I think the other thing to say with them is that usually the external funding is invaluable, and it gives the local authority or the owner the confidence that this work, we can do it, that it is possible. I think I would say that as the director, I spent most of my early part of this project getting the right team together. Although it sounds very kind of fixed, you can't do this type of work without specialists. Like Simon, conservation architects, we have conservation cost managers, engineers the same, project managers specialising in conservation and restoration. And that goes for not only the main contractor, but all their supply chain as well. And it sounds like we're, advocating a closed shop, but it just is that you can't do this stuff unless you've done it before. And choosing the right team and the right type of groups of people and the governance for that team is absolutely vital. And once we've got the right team in place, you are going to get challenges on a job like this. But with the right team, I always feel that you can meet those challenges and you can deal with them. I guess then probably the final thing I'd say on this is that the assumption that there's an inevitable public-private partnership there, it isn't always the case with some buildings. I think we need to look at that public-private partnership in a slightly more nuanced way. I very much doubt that you'd have ever got a private sector partner or developer to do Rochdale Town Hall. There's not enough in it for them, even though they would love the work and they like the sort of status of it. But there certainly is interest and merit in exploring a broader development partnership with the area of the town centre that surrounds the town hall, and we are actually actively doing that. So the private sector sees the kind of love and investment that goes in the town hall, and that then gives them sort of encourages them to look at investment in associated areas. And I think that's where the interest and the potential lies with the public-private partnerships.
It's like how we were talking about earlier, it unlocks more sites for potential regeneration.
Yeah.
Emma's correct. It is a big team operation, this. We all need to work together. It's great to have other team members and a really understanding client. We work together to solve the problems, and there have been many challenges. But one of our jobs as architects is to make this building work as hard as possible for Rochdale. Leave no stone unturned. We need to utilise all space in that building. So one of my concerns 5 or 6 years ago when we started working on this project was how on earth we were going to fill the numerous rooms in all the different wings at Rochdale Town Hall. It is a big building. But amazingly, as we developed the project, the pressure actually came from the opposite way. And almost the building isn't quite big enough for what we want to do with it. So we are utilising it to the absolute maximum. We're maximising its commercial potential. Within the building, within the scheme at the moment, we've got proposals for a cafe. We've We've opened up the Bright Hall, so that was made into a series of cellular spaces in the 1920s. So we've gone back to the original architect's intentions there. That's going to be a room for community use. We've maximised commercial opportunities towards the west of the building, where there'll be possibly more food and beverage areas, office space, etc. So really, it's about giving the council, giving people of Rochdale a building which is not only there as a heritage attraction, but also a building which will actually work for the people, so that as far as possible, it can actually, commercially, it can look after itself. That said, there will always be need to supplement the revenue for the revenue budgets for maintenance. And Emma's done some great work on this. There's a volunteer program looking ahead over the next 10 years where the people of Rochdale themselves will help in terms of further conservation work and maintenance. So it's about making the building work hard for the people, really. But there's lots of other challenges as well. So people think that planning consent issues are going to be difficult to resolve. They see it as an arduous process with blockages. And to go back to the teamwork ethos, we need flexibility and imagination by officers at planning and conservation level. Repair and conservation doesn't bring regeneration. I think that's an important point to make. Change is required, but it must be right for the building. And one of the biggest challenges at Rochdale Town Hall has been accessibility, which is probably not massively on Crossland's mind when he designed the building in the 19th century. Probably very, very far from the top of his list, I'm afraid. So fundamentally, the issue is that the ground hall of the building is probably 500 or 600 millimeters above the surrounding ground level, which gives us an immediate problem in terms of equality of access. And the solution up until now has been to install lots of small individual ramps around the building, which has detracted from the building's significance and aesthetic appearance. So one of the early concepts was to install a terrace at the sides of the building and to the rear of the building, which would give equality of access to all the entrances, but also provide other benefits. So for instance, the food and beverage places will spill out onto the terraces on warm summer's days. And that terrace then becomes part of the building. You read the terrace as part of the building. It's all reversible in the future if necessary. But as a conservation architect, I take myself back to, had Crossland been given that brief at the start, what would he have done to solve the problem? And I believe a terrace to the side and rear of the building would have been, something he may well have come up with. Another thing is the internal circulation is very problematic and has limited the amount to which the building can be used over the years due to restrictions on fire escape, for instance, and accessibility as well. So there was a poorly positioned lift which had been installed in the 20th century. But resolving that and resolving fire escape basically unlocks the potential of the building. And the bold step we took, and I think it's always important to be bold with these things, keeping in mind the significance of the building, was to open up the tower. So there's an amazing clock tower built later by Alfred Waterhouse, but very underused. Had links to the building at each level, but at the end of that link was a little cellular room, which just hadn't been used for years. So we have proposed and obtained consent for a new vertical circulation core within the clock tower. So it's going to be a glass lift in the center, circulated by a sculptural steel staircase. And that will be a visitor attraction in its own right. That will be an experience to just go and use that staircase, use that lift. But it has the twofold advantage of giving access to that end of the building, separate access to that end of the building. So the Bright Hall, which has been opened, will be accessible to the public, separate to the main entrance, so it can be used by communities out of hours. And it just builds in that flexibility, because as architects, we don't know exactly how this building is going to be used. The community will use it as they need to, and we need to look ahead and give them the most options. So I think, in conclusion, it's about looking for all the solving problems as a team, looking for the best way to address the challenges, being bold and making this building fit for purpose for the long term, for the 21st century. All the work we're doing now adds that extra layer of history. It's an important layer within the history of the building. Rochdale Town Hall hasn't had this sort of work for generations, really. It's a generational injection of investment, and we need to leave it there for posterity, for the future.
Just in case we've talked you guys out of doing any heritage schemes based on the challenges discussion, I do think it's really important we bring in the challenges aspect, though. So we're acknowledging that it's not all easy. And even though there are very high rewards for getting these kinds of projects right, they definitely take a lot of time. They take a lot of money. They take a lot of thought and effort to go behind them as well. But with all that being said, I'm just going to ask you guys the question, and I'm going to ask you to give me one-word answers. Is heritage the enemy of regeneration? Simon?
Definitely not. No.
That was 2 words. I said one. Emma?
Of course not.
There we go. All right. Well, Simon, Emma, thank you so much for joining me on the podcast today. I hope you enjoyed yourselves.
Thank you.
Thanks, Julia.
If you want to learn more about what's going on in Rochdale, check out investinrochdale.co.uk. And if you want to stay up to date on the latest trends in the built environment, be sure to subscribe to Place Northwest podcast so you'll never miss an episode. And if you have a chance, please consider leaving us a review. I'm Julia Hatmaker, and thanks again for listening, and have a fantastic rest of your day.